As promised, Dr. Tim McKnight in this morning on our Talk with the Doc. Cold water immersion. It sounds like something that we stepped out into this morning when it was raining, or some sort of, I don't know, cruel baptism. What are we talking about here?
Well, I don't know if it's the latest fad or if there's really good science behind it, but a lot of people are doing it, and there's a lot of when I looked at the research on it, there's some controversy. So not clear if it's really as beneficial as we thought it was, but the concept is pretty interesting, and it was developed by a Dutch athlete. His name was Wim Hof, Hof. He was called the Iceman. And one of the things he did is, one of the things he's notorious for is swimming 217 feet under a sheet of ice in a frozen lake, and was able to come up and not freeze to death, not lose his breath. But he was someone who was had acclimated to the cold waters and was able to do that. Now most of us jump in a water with ice in it, and we can't breathe because of just the shock value, and so it can be dangerous for most of us. But the whole concept is, when you put your body in cold water, the blood becomes shunted from the skin to the vital organs, so the brain, the heart, the lungs, because you have to keep those warm.
Yeah.
And that's self-preservation. And so obviously the skin and the muscles get cold, and the reason they get cold is because the vessels vasoconstrict. You lose blood flow to the outer part of your body, and it goes to the inner part to maintain that core temperature, which is interesting because it's just the opposite of what happens in a stress response. So a stress response, the body, the blood does not go to those internal organs. In fact, people don't realize this maybe, but when you're stressed, the blood that normally goes to the forebrain, which is your thinking part of your brain, it's shunted. You have less blood flow there. So your cognitive function is impaired. It's declined when you feel stressed. And so it goes to your muscles and your skin, all in response for that action. You're gonna fight or flight. So just the opposite, which is kind of an interesting concept, I think. But what happens then when your body warms up is, well, the first thing is when blood is shunted, you take this big blood volume, maybe 16 liters or 4 or 5 gallons of blood, and you shunt it to from your skin to your and muscles to your internal organs. You get more blood flow to the organs, which is always a good thing. But then when you get out of the cold water and your body starts to warm up again naturally, the blood vessels in the skin and the muscles dilate. Now you have more blood flow to the muscles, which helps to remove lactic acid if you're an athlete that's exercised, or some of the other damaged tissues. So it can be a healing thing. And we've kind of talked about this when we talked about ankle sprains and compression therapy and band therapy. We see this work really well, and it's kind of the opposite. So if you've got a sprained ankle and it's swollen, you don't want that chronic inflammation. So what we'll do is we'll wrap it up with a band real tight, and then make you move it, and then we'll put some traction under it, and just that movement with that band compression will push the inflammatory cells that are part of the lymphatic system away from the joint that's making it stiff, and help get blood flow in. I do this. I'm off on a tangent here for a second, but I do this with knuckles or fingers that get tweaked, a sprain or strain. I just kind of tweaked my thumb yesterday playing basketball. Very sore. It's starting to get black and blue. So there was a ligament strain. So I will take a rubber band and wrap it real tight around there for about a minute, as tight as I can handle it, stopping the blood flow, and then release it, and I get this surge of blood in, and the blood is healing. It takes oxygen and all the healing mediators to that part. So we're kind of doing that in a way with this. When we get out of the cold immersion, we're letting blood flow to those muscles. Of course, I think athletes are doing this a lot. After a football practice or a basketball game, they're jumping in these ice baths, and the recommendations,
Figuratively.
Well, figuratively,
They might be sliding in.
But I don't know. Like there's some controversy as to how long you need to be in it. So for an athlete, they're saying maybe 2 or 3 times a week for 10 or 15 minutes. And the water temperature ideally should be between 50 and 59 degrees. Now, I just did an ice water challenge with my brother and nephew a week ago, and we had from the hose in the backyard, it was about 49 degrees, and when we put the ice in, it dropped down to about 46. So that maybe was a little colder than it needed to be, but that's probably similar to what the athletes are experiencing in the locker room. And so that's the concept. And again, it's increased blood flow. But something else that's pretty well established is you get an increase in dopamine, almost a 2.5-fold increase in dopamine release. Dopamine is one of those happy hormones that make you feel just relaxed and at peace. It also wakes you up. And so if you do this in the morning in a shower, it can really make you feel alert. Now, I'm not sure how long that dopamine increase is in effect, probably for several hours, but certainly not all day. And again, this is not something you need to do every day, but some people will say up to 13 minutes a week. You can do this in a shower if you slowly turn the water to cold, maybe for 2 minutes a day. That's what I do, and it's for about 14 minutes a week. Sometimes it's a little bit longer. But there's other benefits besides just the healing of tissues, and those are some of the things that I wanted to mention because I think that's where people get drawn into this. Is boy, I hear these benefits, I want them. So the recovery of tissues that have been stressed from exercise is quicker theoretically.
Yeah.
More dopamine. It helps remove lactic acid, so it removes the soreness. It helps to remove the inflammation and pain from lactic acidosis. It can promote muscle healing, which is great for the athletes that are having these small strains. But something for a lot of us that I think is pretty interesting is that it increases the brown fat activity in your body. We have white fat and we have a small amount of brown fat. And brown fat is, babies have a lot of brown fat because they have a very small or very high surface area to body weight. They lose heat really quickly. So they have to keep themselves warm, and they have this brown fat around their neck and in the chest, and that keeps them warm. So it generates heat. As we get older, we lose less of that or more of that. So we can't maintain our body heat as well. So it increases the activity of brown fat, increases the metabolic rate of that fat. So it generates heat to help keep you warm. I definitely feel like I've noticed that with myself. So those are some benefits. They also say it helps reduce the stress response. And again, it's just the opposite of the stress response. Stress is shunning blood to the skin and the muscles. This is shunning blood internally, and then it goes back to the skin and muscles. It reduces the activity of white fat, so that's good. And then it reduces insulin resistance and makes you more insulin sensitive, which is huge because we've talked a lot about that with intermittent fasting. That's one of the benefits of intermittent fasting. It lowers the insulin resistance. And so cold water immersion may do that. There are a couple of risks with this the ice water immersion. Number one is if you have heart disease, hypertension, peripheral vascular disease, meaning poor blood flow generally to your limbs, cardiac arrhythmias, or a condition called cold agglutinin disease, which is a disease where if your body temperature if your blood gets below 86 degrees, you have antibodies that will start to stick together, and they'll stick to your red blood cells and make them clump together. And then the blood cells, because of the clumping, they just burst open and they leak. And so you can actually lower your blood counts. That could be dangerous. Yeah. So these people have to be really sensitive to cold. And we know that cold water, where you're immersing your body in cold water, that transfers heat 25 faster than the air. So everybody knows that when you're cold and you're wet, you're going to lose your body temperature more quickly. So that can drop pretty quickly. So those are the things that people need to be aware of and careful with. So clear it with your primary care physician if you're not sure. And then some people will go in a lake or a pond. And a lot of times those lakes and ponds, even with ice on them, they're maybe 50, 60 degrees. They're not as cold as you think, but you never should do that alone, obviously.
Right.
You never know what might happen. You get stuck in the mud, or you could have something tragic happen and you got nobody there to help you. A couple other benefits that I found in one of the articles that I looked at was when you do these cold water immersions, whether it's, again, 3 times a week for 10 to 15 minutes or 2 times a week or daily in the shower for 2 or 3 minutes, it increases the production of thyroid hormone, free T3, which is the one that most of us never measure. I always measure that because that really tells me if somebody's low in thyroid. And when you're low in thyroid, you will be more cold. So this actually increases natural thyroid production, which is great. And that may be one of the reasons why people who do this, they don't have that problem with feeling cold all the time.
Yeah.
It increases the activity of your T lymphocytes and helper T cells, which is part of your immune system. So it may enhance immunity. It increases the concentration of zinc in your blood, which is also part of the immune system, part of the collagen and the tissue elasticity. But some of the other benefits, the things that it's reported to help, is it reduces the bad lipoprotein, apolipoprotein B, which is a bad one. It's associated with heart disease. It reduces the amount of that. Reduces the amount of homocysteine. We've mentioned homocysteine before here. Homocysteine is a byproduct of methionine, an amino acid metabolite. And when it goes high, that injures the blood vessel lining. And it can be associated with people that have heart disease. They have this. This is easily fixed by taking a B complex every day. It's a genetic problem with metabolism and error of metabolism. So it can lower that chemical homocysteine, which makes you more likely to have heart disease. It reduces the markers, the chemicals that we see when somebody has oxidative stress, which is anything that's inflammatory. So it reduces inflammation. And it may reduce your risk of heart disease. So there's a lot of potential benefits. Again, it's a recent fad, so we don't know how long and how effective.
Can you, no pun intended, but can you ease into this?
Yes.
A few minutes and then a little more and a little more?
That's a great question, and you should do that. When I first heard of this, I said, I'm going to do it. I'm in the shower with my nice warm water, and I turned it to cold, just right to cold, and I just hopped around. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to, I thought my heart was going to stop. It was pretty ugly. So now what I do is I take it over maybe 20 seconds and slowly dial it to the full cold. And here's one of the things I love about this, even if it has no physical benefits. It's a mind over matter thing. It's calming your mind down. It's pushing yourself to do something that your body doesn't really want to do. And you have to overcome. It's like anything else. What requires discipline and mind over matter. And that's just sort of one of my new recent discoveries is telling my mind there's no limits to it. I'm going to be in control of what I let my body go through. When I'm lifting weights, it doesn't really count to me until I get to that rep where I can't get it any further and somebody's got to help me and I have to keep pushing. And anything that I do, I want to get to that point where I'm uncomfortable and I'm pushing beyond it and I'm not letting my mind dictate what I'll do. And this definitely requires that kind of a mindset. But yeah, start out with maybe maybe you don't go full cold. You just go lukewarm or just a little bit below lukewarm and get used to it. And you'll find that it's not difficult. When my brother and nephew and I did this ice water challenge 2 weeks ago, my brother he's done the ice water, the cold showers, but not consistently and not recently. He got out after about 5 minutes. He was starting to shiver. I know he could have stayed in longer. He was the guinea pig. We didn't know how long anybody was going to stay in. When I got in, because I was used to this, that cold ice water, it was cold and it was almost stinging cold. It was almost like burning cold, but I blocked it out and it took me a lot longer to begin the shivering sequence or that process. And that's usually when they tell you to get out. When you're starting to lose that much body heat, you get out. And then my nephew, he's a different breed and he's younger, he was in for 15 minutes. So, and I think we were all trying to outdo each other a little bit too.
Sure.
But it is something you can ease into and you can learn to tolerate it better. One thing that I did not anticipate with this, that I don't know what this response was all about, but when I came out of that 12-minute ice bath, I was in my bathing suit and it was 60 degrees and windy and our wives were standing around shivering in their sweatshirts. I wasn't cold at all. And so after about 5 minutes, I went inside, I dried off and put my clothes on and came back out. And I was shaking like a leaf. I thought it was going to bite my tongue off. My jaw was just chattering so bad. And it took about 15 minutes for that to stop. And it took about 2 hours for my body temperature to completely come back to normal. So again, this wasn't the 10 minutes is usually about the limit. And, I pushed it a little bit. So again, if nothing else, it's mind over matter. Do it for a short time in the shower. Yeah, you don't have to be pushing yourself, but there may be these potential benefits. The dopamine is pretty clearly established. The mind over matter connection and learning to dictate what you're going to do. I found that's translated to a lot of things I do. Still has not translated to my willpower to walk away from a plate of cookies. Maybe I need to be in a little bit colder water or longer. But it's been it's fun. And it's something I've learned to. I haven't missed a day doing it in the shower because I'm afraid if I do, I'll get out because it's not in my comfort zone the first thing in the morning.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, thanks for the personal update too.
Yes.
Appreciate that.
You're
And Dr. Tim McKnight this morning as we talk about cold water immersion here on our Talk with the Doc.